Okay, so here's another lecture video for topic 4 about psychopathy and sadism. Some people say psychopathy, but that sounds, I just don't like that. I like psychopathy. It sounds more elitist when you say it that way. So I will use psychopathy. Other people will use psychopathy, and I'm sure psychopathy is probably slightly more correct. Or maybe that's like the new way of saying things. It's like when some people say, oh, this is quasi-experimental or quasi-experimental. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. Psychopathy, psychopathy. All right, I'm going to say psychopathy because it just sounds more bougie. Okay? But today we're going to talk about how psychopathy impacts serial killing, and also where sadism comes in. And once we understand the psychopath and the sociopath, it'll sort of make sense why a lot of really sadistic killers would probably score high on the psychopathy checklist. Okay, so now if this would only move to the next slide. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. All right. So the book did a pretty weird job at explaining how this all works. So I'll lay it out for you. So as we talked about in the previous video, when it comes to understanding anti-social personality disorder, it is sort of difficult to, we're still figuring it out, right? And there are different scientists, different psychologists coming from different perspectives on this. And some people think that you should just put everyone in the APD bucket and focus on the certain traits that they're displaying more of. While others like to say, okay, no, some of these people who are antisocial have this particular type of antisocial personality disorder. And so out of that came the conception of sociopath and psychopath. And so the best way to think about it is that of all the people who have antisocial personality disorder, a very small group of them would be considered sociopaths, and an even smaller group would be considered psychopaths. But they all have antisocial personality disorder. Now, some psychologists say, why are we digging so deep into this? Let's just say they're all antisocial personality. Whereas other psychologists, especially those involved in criminal profiling, like to differentiate between at least psychopaths and the sort of non-specific people with APD. So most people would be considered APD non-specific. And by the way, non-specific isn't like an academic term. It's just a term that I'm using to make this easier for you to understand. And oftentimes even, so to add to the confusion, some people haven't differentiated between a sociopath and a psychopath. So a lot of people would think a sociopath and a psychopath is the same thing. However, other scholars, and again, these are people who are more concerned with serial killing and criminal profiling, would differentiate between the two. So we are going to differentiate between the two. So sociopaths and psychopaths have some similarities in common. They fall both within APD, but the two groups, so sociopaths and psychopaths, out of all of the anti-personality traits, they also display conceitedness, deceitfulness, and manipulation. Okay? And they can also be hostile, they can also be impulsive, they can also be cynical, but if you were to take just all the sociopaths and all the psychopaths out of the whole pool of people in the APD group, you would find that pretty much all of them would have these three things in common. Whereas some people in the non-specific group, you know, there might be one dude that you pull out and he'll be impulsive and deceitful and maybe have disregard for right and wrong. right? But when you look at the sociopaths and psychopaths and you put them in their own little pool together, you'll find these three traits most of the time in common between them. And so it makes sense that some scholars are like, why are we trying to even go deeper into this? Why don't we just say they're all sociopaths, right? Or say they're all psychopaths. But for the purpose of understanding serial killers, or maybe certain criminals, it is important to differentiate between the two. So a sociopath is, to think about it like this. A sociopath is a little bit more human than a psychopath. A sociopath is also a little more overt than the psychopath. Like, most of us could encounter a sociopath and be like, oh, dude, you're a sociopath. Get out of my face. But most of us who encounter a psychopath would need to hang out with this person or get to know this person for a very long time before we can determine whether they're actually a psychopath. A sociopath, and you can see they make up about 4% of people, and at least these are based on estimates that, I mean, are not super reliable, but they're not unreliable either. So we can, and most of these estimates, by the way, when you look at these scientific estimates that we make, especially in terms in regarding the coronavirus and stuff, remember, statisticians usually make these estimations to err on the side of caution. Okay, so if we say about 4% of society is sociopaths, in reality, it's probably a little bit more. But we like to err on the side of caution. So anyway, so a sociopath, these are people who can't hold down a job, right? It's these people, they show up, and you might have experienced this at your own work. You might have found there might have been this person who came in, they worked for like maybe 3 months, and then they rage quit over something kind of small or stupid. They will lie and cheat to get their goal. So if they realize they can't get a goal quickly, they can't get to something quickly, they will lie or cheat to get it. You will see outward displays of antisocial traits. So again, they'll have violent outbursts, they'll scream at you, they'll call you a bastard. I don't know. I don't want to get too crazy with the cursing on here. And impulsivity. So you might see them over at the casino. They might be smokers, they might be doing some drugs, they might like drinking, or they might have a sex problem. A psychopath, on the other hand, they can fit in. They can practice more self-control. They're a little more calculating. Oftentimes we don't know that they're there. They're not outwardly violent. If they are violent, you don't know because they're so good at hiding it. So if you were to think about a fictional character, a sociopath would be Joe from You, right? A little more outward, a little more empathetic. Whereas Dexter Morgan would be a psychopath, right? You would hardly, no, he worked for the police and they didn't even know he committed murders. And he also didn't really fall in love with people. He didn't really understand he faked his relationships. Whereas Joe from You, right, falls in love and cares about the people he's with. But he can only hold down a certain few relationships. And that's the main difference, is that a sociopath can actually hold down a few relationships. While it's difficult, they can actually feel empathy, they can actually be in relationships, while a psychopath almost never can. They cannot establish meaningful relationships. They're so into their own needs and their own wants that they're just confused by why would I give a crap about anyone else and what they want. And that makes them dangerous. So how can we establish what, and by the way, sociopaths and psychopaths obviously can be serial killers, right? Joe from You, although some people would make him a psychopath, but I think the fact that he can hold down relationships to some extent makes him a sociopath. And also he's a little more outward with his antisocial personality traits. Now, another sociopath, to some extent, could be Ricky from Trailer Park Boys, right? Although he's a little stupid, so I wouldn't make him a quintessential example of a sociopath. But if you were to compare someone who's a little more outward to someone who you can hardly ever tell does anything wrong until you really spend time with them and you realize, oh wait, they don't care about me, right? That's the difference. So how do we find psychopaths? Well, we've had myriad tools and checklists and stuff, but the most commonly used one is the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, created by this person named Hare, and it's a 40-point scale. So psychopaths will typically score 30 or higher, and then the average person will score about a 5, whereas the average inmate will score about 23. So we don't really know where this sociopath would fall on this scale, because this is a checklist only aimed at psychopaths. But one of the and so here is here on the slide, someone have created this nice little brainstorm of this breakdown of the two main factors that the checklist measures. So essentially, from a statistical standpoint, so you can have variables, but variables that are related to each other, you bring them together into what we call a factor. So if you look here at factor 1, which is interpersonal affective, like there are many things that you can use to measure your interpersonal skills or how effective you are towards people, right? And that can be grandiose self-worth, lying, right? Interpersonal lying, self-worth, effective, superficial charm, interpersonal, conning, interpersonal, lack of remorse, right? That can be both. Empathy, that can be both. Failure to accept responsibility, right? All of those things would fall within that one factor. And so same with the social deviance. So these factors are then determine your score on the 40-point scale, and then we can say, well, you were 30 or higher, so you are probably a psychopath. But the thing is that no psychopath almost ever scores the exact same as another one. So there is some variability in the psychopaths, and there are some scholars that are saying we're not really studying what these psychopaths are after. What are their tools? What are they using their psychopathy for? Right? Some psychopaths have some weird sexual paraphilia. So paraphilia is like a fetish that's like really weird. It's like paraphilia is like when you are into sexual behavior that most people are not into. Other psychopaths they just want to make a bunch of money. Other psychopaths want to be admired. Other psychopaths want to kill people. Other psychopaths just enjoy manipulating people. Right? They like to play the Game of Thrones. Either you win or you die. So we don't really measure their tools, or we haven't really done so in a meaningful way. And so we're going to focus on psychopaths that like to kill people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you just have killing psychopaths. You might have killing psychopaths who also like to make a lot of money, or killing psychopaths who also have weird sex paraphilias, like Ted Bundy. I mean, Ted Bundy was amazing, to be honest, right? There's some documentaries about him on Netflix, and I implore you to watch them. But this guy just fit right into society, and was smart enough to represent himself in court to an extent, to a point where the judge was like, "Damn, dude, you did really well. Too bad you're gonna go die now in jail," or in prison, actually. But he fit into society. I mean, he was a good-looking guy. But then he also liked to kill people and have sex with them, before and after death. So, and like, some of the stuff he did with his victims, like, for instance, like, he would sometimes fake to have a broken arm, or to have a limp, or to be crippled or something, and someone would come to him, to his aid, and then he'd, bam, snatch him up and kill him. Like, he planned everything about where he was going to take them, how he was going to take them, and how he was going to kill them. Whereas, like, Joe from the movie You very seldom planned out his murders, right? A lot of times his murders would just happen right in the moment. It would be this impulse would take over him, right? Sociopath. Okay. So where does sadism come into this? Like, why sadism? Well, sadism, let's talk about it sort of independent of psychopathy here for a second. Sadism is when you like to inflict pain on others, right? Which is different from masochism, which is liking pain being inflicted on you. Now, being sadistic, if you're being sadistic, you are inflicting some sort of emotional or physical pain on someone. And you can start connecting the dots now. Now, some of you might be like, I don't know what it would feel like. What is sadism? We've all felt the pleasurable side of sadism at some point. Think about this. Who here has ever been in an argument with someone who's wronged you? Right? So think about maybe you were in an argument with, maybe you're just so freaking pissed off. You're pissed off beyond belief, and your girlfriend or boyfriend, right, did something ridiculous, and they admit that they were in the wrong. But you're not done being angry yet, right? You get that rage feeling right in your, like, sort of in your stomach and chest, you know, like it's almost like right where your stomach and your heart area comes together, right? It's like this almost this cold and warm at the same time rage feeling, you know what I'm talking about? And you can see the submission in the eyes of your partner, because they know they're wrong, and they just want you to stop being mad, and you can see they feel really bad for what they've done. But you know that if you continue to sort of to go at them, to insult them, to say mean things to them, it will make them feel even worse. And you're enjoying that because they deserve it, or you feel like they deserve it. When you go into that mode, that is sadism. But most of us are like, all right, damn, and then you snap out of it because we have that empathy. And then you're like, okay, yeah, I know, I forgive you, I'm sorry for saying all those mean things, I didn't mean it like that, I was just blah, 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 blah. But the psychopath and some sociopaths, they never snap out of it. Instead, that rage feeling and seeing that person submitting to you, that turns into sexual arousal. They start to really find joy in that. And it gets even better when they know the person is in absolute distress. Right? Our brains, or our conscious at some point for the normal person, when you see that your partner's in distress, at some point you pull yourself out of that because you don't want that to be the case. You're enjoying it in the moment, but at some point you snap out of it. The psychopath or the sociopath might not ever snap out of it. And they might really find joy in that feeling and chase that feeling and want more of it. And so they might start, and now this is where the McDonald triad comes back in. They might realize, oh, I can do this to a dog. I can really beat the shit out of this dog. I can kill dogs. I can kill someone's pet and watch them be upset about it and really get joy out of that. I can kidnap someone. I can take them into my basement. I can tie them up. And I can tell them I'm going to kill them and watch the fear in their eyes. And then tell them, no, I'm going to let them go. And then break that feeling of relief by starting to strangle them and watching the life leave their eyes as they accept their death. That is sadism. And so many psychologists will say that it's sort of a paraphilia, and that it's something that doesn't start as a sexual thing. Like it might start, you might be introduced to it as a child when your parents are extremely abusive to you or neglectful, or you grow up in a hateful situation. But as you delve more into it, there is an arousal part of it. And oftentimes it becomes sexual. There is a sexual component to it. Now, there are more normal people who are also into sadism. Right? Have you ever heard of BDSM or sadomasochism, bondage? There are people who are into it, but the difference is between people in the BDSM community is that there's a consent aspect to it. Right? You have the safe word. At some point you stop. And to those people, I'm by no means trying to cast any sort of bad vibes on them, because I actually have a lot of respect for the people in that BDSM community, because those people are able to really be in touch with themselves, with exactly what they want, and they can find that fulfillment with another person who understands them. Right? Someone might enjoy being stepped on with high heels on their face, I don't know. And they are able to be honest enough about themselves to say that to their partner and ask their partner to do it, and their partner's like, cool, I'll do that for you. Right? So as weird as the quote-unquote normal person might think that is, these people are in touch with themselves and are able to find a community where they can, without feeling any shame or humiliation, share those feelings. And frankly, I can imagine it being quite freeing. But the psychopath who sadistically murders people doesn't care about consent. There's no safe word. And in fact, they enjoy that moment when people have realized there's nothing, when people lose the will to live. And a lot of serial killers, when you talk to them, they say at that point I kill them, because they lose that joy at that point. Right? They pushing someone to that point of giving up is what's arousing. And they never snap out of it. But once that person's given up, there's no more value in that sadistic behavior, right? The person's like, all right, just go ahead, freaking kill me, I know I'm dead. So there you go. Stuff is weird. All right, good luck.